So, good afternoon, Mr. DJ Cassidy.
Good afternoon, sir.
How are you doing? How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great, and the opportunity to talk about my journey is a good one.
Which is where we're going to start. So let's start from the beginning, to which I know of. 10 years old, you say that you want decks to your parents. What sparked that initial desire to want to get decks?
Well, as you say, when I was 9 years old, I asked my parents for 2 turntables and a mixer for my 10th birthday, and when I turned 10, DJ Cassidy was born. They gave me the greatest gift of my whole life. I was a hip-hop kid early on. I remember being 3, 4 years old watching the movie Breakin', and I wanted to be like Turbo and Ozone. I remember being 5, 6 years old, jumping up and down on the bed, listening to Run DMC and Beastie Boys with my sister. But I also looked up to 3 guys by the names of Grandmaster Flash, Kool Herc, and Africa Bambaataa, the founders of hip-hop. And it was a great thing that I looked up to them, because at that age I was very close-minded and thought that to fully embrace hip-hop, you had to hate everything else. But I knew as a young kid that in order to be like my heroes, I had to play like my heroes. So I started researching what Herc and Flash and Bambaataa played, and I realized they weren't playing hip-hop music because there was no hip-hop music. They were playing soul, funk, disco, rock and roll, reggae, Latin music, everything under the sun, and bringing it all together to create this new sound and this new culture. I became completely fascinated by that, and it totally opened my mind, and I made it my mission as a young kid to be completely undefined. And I wanted to be the kid that people would call on to play all music for all people all over the world. That was my motto, and it still is my motto. Now, by the time I was 18, I started to live that motto. I started to DJ around the world and play some of the hottest nightclubs and events of my time. I had the privilege of being able to DJ for a lot of people who I admired, a lot of people who I looked up to, a lot of people who I listened to. I started DJing for people like Puffy and Jay-Z and Russell Simmons and Naomi Campbell and Anna Wintour and Oprah Winfrey, and eventually the President of the United States. I was the first DJ to ever play an inauguration, first DJ to ever play at the White House. And no matter who I was DJing for, whether it was the leaders of the hip-hop world, leaders of the fashion world, or leaders of the free world, whether I was playing at a hip-hop club in New York or at a house club in Saint-Tropez, no matter who was in front of me, whether I was playing for young, old, black, white, rich, poor, or anyone in between, I began to view the soul music of the late 1970s and early 1980s as the greatest and most universal dance music of all time. No matter what music I was playing, no matter what music people came expecting to hear, it was the classic records of that era that spoke to all people. Those records not only worked, they killed. They brought a spirit, an emotion, and an energy to the air like no other kind of music. I always wanted young people to have something of their own that felt like this music. I always wanted young people to have music that felt like this, that could define their own lives and their own generation. And instead of talking about it, I decided to do it. So 4 years ago, I set out on a mission to bring the greatest and most universal dance music of all time back to nightlife, back to the airwaves, back to the dance floor. That's how this album really all began. Now, it sounded like a great idea, but then I had to put it into action. So you might say, how did you go about doing such an endeavor? Well, the first step was I put my favorite 25 songs from that era in a playlist in iTunes. I put them in chronological order, and they all fell between 1978 and 1982. Very specific 5-year time span. Then, well, I should back up a second. Some of the artists on that list of songs were Michael Jackson, Earth, Wind and Fire, Kool and the Gang, Chic, Shaka Khan and Rufus, Shalimar, Luther Vandross, Rick James. I said, how do I get my songs to sound like these songs, to feel like these songs? Because feeling is the most important thing. So the second step is I made a list of every musician who played on every song. The drummers, the guitar players, the bass players, the horn players. And what I saw after I finished 25 lists was the same names repeating over and over. It was clear that the session that the producers and recording artists were hiring the same session musicians to play on these records, that these young kids basically in their low 20s were the men behind the music. They were the architects of the sound. And I said, if I want to complete my mission, I need to go to the source. So over the past 4 years, I reunited 22 of the most legendary musicians of the late 1970s and early 1980s for the first time in over 30 years in one room to recreate their definitive sound with no samples, no covers, no interpolations. Then I said, I need new voices to bring this music back to life. And those voices have to represent my generation, and they have to represent all genres of music, R&B, pop, electronic, rock and roll, everything. So I recruited 13 of the most diverse, renowned recording artists of my era to write and record original songs. And that list includes John Legend, Estelle, Kelly Rowland, Melanie Fiona, Mary J. Blige, Chromeo, Passion Pit, Neo, CeeLo, Robin Thicke, Jessie J, Usher, and R. Kelly.